The tables are turned on Cherry Valley Elementary staff members with an exercise Monday that takes them back to class, showing teachers ways to better understand the challenges many students face because of poverty.
Yeah, I learned more about the Forest City's most vulnerable and what's being done to raise awareness.
Stressful, but also really, I think, important that we feel that. We can't get numb to the fact that this is what people are going through every day.
Many students face the reality of poverty every day. In fact, Rockford's poverty rate is 21%, nearly twice the average in Illinois, according to the Regional Office of Education.
With the poverty level that has gone up in the city and stuff, and in really the country, it's like we need to understand what our families are experiencing.
For some students, school is a refuge, a place to find warmth and fill their empty stomachs with food. Since many of the effects of poverty happen behind closed doors, Cherry Valley Elementary School trains staff to recognize the signs and react appropriately. It's all done through simulation.
Educators are preparing to be family members living in poverty. They are reading their roles, they're finding out what their family is going through, the hardships that they're experiencing, and then around the perimeter of the gym, they are going to be community providers that are working to serve those families.
First grade teacher Haley Bonnick says the training is eye-opening.
Our kids are going through things that we probably will never fully understand, but to try to put ourselves in those positions helps us to be able to know how we're going to help them. Because sometimes it's not as simple as a kid who's acting out, they're coming to school sleepy or tired or hungry. I get to kind of put myself in that perspective and realize that maybe it's not really about me at all, and how can I better serve them.
In Rockford, Jake Pearson, WIFR News.
Leaders with the Regional Office of Education say research shows a supportive bond with even one caring adult can prevent or reverse the neurological and emotional impacts of toxic stress on a student's life.
Well,